The fourth person born was Sarah. She was born about 12.8 quadrillion years ago. And she is the mother of Muhammad. Her name here is Zerilana. This was the time of the ghost rites. The fifth person born was a person named Felicity Jones here, and her name then was Sasha Ladrill. And they were born about 12.7 quadrillion years ago. The time frame from about 12.5 quadrillion years ago to 12.4 quadrillion years ago is called the time of the Gozerites. The Gozerites were people like Sarah and Sashkaladriel and Gozer and Raquel, who is Sigourney Weaver, and Esther, who is Eleven from Stranger Things, and many people who were related to Gozer and Sigourney Weaver, who became like sort of an army of women, mostly, who were called the Gozerites, who fought against Jim Carrey in a series of like battles and wars. And they became people who really started to like a person named Muhammad, who was born 7th. And his name here is Paul Andrews, which is an anagram for Pan. And Paul Andrews Pan. Right, and he's a dentist in Japan. So there are many people that were born during this time frame, like thousands of people, and they joined both Jim Carrey and sort of a person named Pan in a series of wars from about 12.4 quadrillion years ago to about 11 quadrillion years ago. They were called the Pan Games, and the Pan Games were like the wars between James T. Hook and a person named Pan. And there are even current religions today that are sort of based upon that, like Caribbeanism, which is a pedophile rapist religion, of pirates, which is attended to by people like Satan, who is a pedophile rapist. Sort of based upon the Pan Games, man, because Paul Andrews, who is much later and currently known to many people as Muhammad, is a person who fights like wars, holy wars, at times, against people like Jim Carrey, who fights on the side of like governments and places like London. And he like organizes people like the Redcoats against people like the Pirates, who would be people like Jim, his own son, and people like Huckleberry Finn, who is Peter Pan's father Pan, who is Muhammad and Paul Andrews. These wars were sort of like what you can see in a pedophile movie called Conan the Barbarian. Conan the Barbarian is somewhat similar to like what the world was like then. And the world was sort of called Palladianism, and that was like a pedophile time frame of mostly boys and girls being chased by older men to have sex with them and at times have children with them. There was a person who was very famous for this named Seth, who was Rick Moranis, who had many children with children. And that's called Sethitism. And he made a film called Spaceballs about this time frame of like having children with children. Also, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, is about this time frame too. This sort of, which is by actually Felicity Jones originally, who's also known as Sash Galadriel. These movies are about the time frame from about 11 quadrillion years ago to about 10 quadrillion years ago. And that time frame is a time frame of extreme warfare, extreme conflict, extreme pedophilia. Mostly extreme pedophilia. And there was a war between the Gozerites and God called the War of Please, Pleez. And Please later became known as the Holy Spirit, actually, and also was the mother of a species now known as the blue whales. And they have made various films about this. I think Star Trek, the movie, Part 4 or something, is about, like, the whales talking to humanity. That would be a movie about the Holy Spirit. And that was a movie about that time frame, too, because Jim Carrey was a person who ran a ship that looked somewhat like the Star Trek Enterprise. And, he chased after Paul Andrews very often. Thousands of people were born, and like the book of Mark starts around here, and it's about Muhammad's life of being born and living very miserably aboard a ship called the Pan Starship. And he is attended to by 4 angels, he says: Sarah, Jezebel, Ekaterina Long, who later became known as Queen Elizabeth, and Sash Galadriel, who is Felicity Jones. And Jezebel allowed, the story goes, people to visit Pan, who were actually spies for Jim Carrey's network, who began torturing him so miserably. It's like out of control how horribly he was tortured. He also apparently raped his mom at that time, Sarah, and he was punished by Sarah for trillions of years in the most horrific ways you could ever imagine. He was placed in rooms until he couldn't breathe from how many times his body touched the walls, with his skull reaching to the top of his skulls of his skeletons reaching to the top of the room. The room was the size of like a football field, and they kept putting him there over and over again with his skeletons all around, telling him to eat parts of his own body and stuff. He is an extreme torture victim, Paul Andrews is. Alright, extreme torture victim by people like Sarah and God. But Sarah, who is Daryl Hannah, now loves him, and God is a person who loves him as well, who is Jim Carrey. And let's just say Paul Andrews never sort of got over it. And he himself became a rapist torturer later, and both people, Jim Carrey and Muhammad, have attempted to erase their memories of these time frames because they were so horrific. These efforts were partially successful, and Paul Andrews later renamed himself Muhammad about 5 quadrillion years ago, after he burned out parts of his brain successfully, such that he couldn't remember time frames of his own perpetration of extreme pedophilia and rape. And like, I sort of believe it is wrong to like hold him responsible for things he cannot even remember. He can't even remember these things from like the past of his time frames of extreme rape and pedophilia. And so he changed his name from Mark. His name was Mark from about the year 9 quadrillion years ago to 5 quadrillion years ago to Muhammad after he was named Beelzebub for several trillion years by Saskatchewan. These are the time frames of the ghost rites, the time frames of the early settlements of mankind, which were sort of the time frame when Jehovah was born about 11 quadrillion years ago. And we'll later go over a time frame from about like 9 quadrillion years ago to about 5 quadrillion years ago.